I would like to congratulate you to be on the engineering side of the business, because what we think engineering and especially infrastructure is a booming area. And during this half an hour, we'll certainly come back a couple of times why we do believe that in engineering and infrastructure project is booming, even in a post-COVID period. We do believe that a lot of the stimulus packages of the single countries will go mainly to infrastructure projects. So infrastructure, our leitmotif is improve life quality, reduce inequality. With infrastructure projects, we do believe that we can reduce the inequality we have in the world. I mean, if we think about the fact that over 1.1 billion people, almost 60% of the world's population, still have no access to electricity, or about 660 million people worldwide lack access to clean water, 2.4 billion people do not have adequate sanitation, and 1/3 of the world's population is not served by an all-weather road. I think that are things we have to rectify, and that's for us certainly an opportunity also as insurance, reinsurance to play an important role. Next, please. So the global forecast for infrastructure investment looks as you can see here. So we had we forecast by 2040 accumulated global investment need of 94 trillion US dollars. So we are talking about 94 million US dollar we have to invest by 2040. The expected investment in the same time period is around, or will be around, 79 trillion, leaving a funding gap of 15 trillion US dollar. So what you can see here on the slide is the green line is the baseline, the forecast of infrastructure investment on the assumption that countries continue to invest in line with current trends. The investment need, the blue line, is the line countries have to invest to match their best performing peers. And then you see also there is an additional 10% countries should invest to match the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals defined by the United Nations till 2030. So you can see that's huge potential for us as insurance reinsurance company on the liability side by selling insurance, certainly also on the asset side. I mean, certainly many insurance/reinsurance company can invest their money also in some of the infrastructure project. So how can we help? How can we help also to close the protection gap in infrastructure project? And for that, I would propose we go to the next slide. So close the protection gap with inherent defects insurance. So successful developers deliver high quality projects and attractive financial returns. Feature of sustainable infrastructure are design on construction longevity. So we want to have projects which are really built for the next 100 years, and we need strong investors foundation. So what are strong investor foundation? What do I mean with that? The developments discussed command significant capital, meaning that developers and project owners must manage a variety of risks to protect their investment. One area with high potential exposure is inherent defect for constructed asset. Despite the potential significant balance sheet exposure should such defect cause structural damage, this type of exposure is still relatively little accounted and aware in the region. So the idea is a unique product which ensures coverage for buildings and infrastructure for up to 12 years after completion. Here's how this is done. So direct recovery, when a hidden defect causes damage or threaten structural integrity. So what are hidden or inherent defects? Hidden or inherent defects, also called latent defects, are those that can be traced back to faults in design, plans, materials, specification, or workmanship during the planning and construction of a building or structures, which are only discovered or result in material damage after the practical completion of the building or structure. Inherent defects affecting the load-bearing structure must be considered as a severe exposure for a building. A major collapse of a load-bearing structure or the threat of such a collapse would likely give rise to a substantial financial demand for expediting rectification and recovery. So inherent defect can really threaten this idea of us to have projects which are longevity fit and also can erode the financial stability of the investor. Next slide, please. Let's come to the IDI cover. So what is it what we cover here? So the cover, the IDI cover is a cover for any defect or deficiency in the structural components attributable to errors, faults, or omission in design, calculation, specification, workmanship, materials, or to a combination thereof, which is very often the case. Provided, however, such defect or deficiency existed and was undiscovered at the date of issue of the taking over certificate. So from the graph you can see here, we can detect where does inherent defect insurance really sit. So inherent defect insurance starts actually after completion of the project, at the date of handing over of the project, when the project goes over from the contractor to the principal. So any defect which is already in the project, so inherent in the project, but is not discovered at this point in time, can trigger an inherent defect insurance. The cause of the inherent defect is immaterial in triggering the policy. So if you have a collapse, the insurance company will not ask what is the cause, but IDI first and almost pays the loss. The policy is triggered by the presence of a structural defect which undermines structural integrity or a collapse not caused by any external peril. So if the collapse is caused by an external peril, so then typically the property policy would cover. But if the collapse or the imminent threat of collapse is coming from an inherent type of defect, then IDI would cover that. Inherent defect insurance indemnifies costs for repairing, restoring, strengthening, or rebuilding the insured property damaged or threatened by inherent structural defects. So also here, I would like to stress it's enough already a threat of collapse that the policy would be triggered, and the policy would then pay for strengthening, for instance, or redoing of the project. The defect must originate within the structure, but the insurance pays for damage to the whole insured property, including non-structural elements and services. So even if in case of a collapse due to a structural defect, and as a consequence also non-structural elements are destroyed, or services like elevator, air conditioning, whatever, this would be covered as well in the policy as consequential damages to the structural deficiency. The period is normally 10 to 12 years, so this depends a bit on the markets. In the more Anglo-Saxon markets, it's more about 12 years, more the Francophone markets about 10 years. This depends a lot. You see also other forms like a quinquennal, which is then only 5 years. So also depends, but the maximum I would say it's around the 12 years. You can see also here in this graph. The insured for the IDI is typical the principal or the owner and or subsequent owners. So the policy goes with the structure or with the asset to subsequent owners. Insurance property include residential, commercial, industrial building, but also civil engineering project like bridges, tunnels, supporting walls, whatever. Depending from country to country, you have countries where policy is mandatory for four-wall construction. In other countries, policy is mandatory for public financed type of infrastructural project. So it depends. It depends a bit from which angle or what type of history the single countries have, and what is the need for insuring or for asking for an IDI cover. Next slide, please. So what can be hidden defect causes and what can be the consequences then of that? So you can see the error can be in design, specification, or workmanship. The defect can be in defective material. So from start, you have the wrong material, defective material, faulty components and manufacturing errors, or also or challenging ground conditions. So, and consequences here can be structural damages, for instance. So an under reinforced floor slab causing excessive strains in the structure. This might be due to a design or workmanship error, can be a consequence. Facade damages, so pieces of curtain wall glazing falling off the building. So if you have one of these nice facade, you know, with nice glazing, and if during the construction due to a workmanship error or a fault in the connector of these facade pieces, if the facade comes down, this can be covered under the IDI. A collapse. So the collapse of a building may be caused by faulty materials, design, bad workmanship, or a combination of these, which is very often the case. So you cannot trace it back to one single error, but very often it's a combination of things. Settlement is also a very typical one. So a foundation failure causing building settlement. So possible causes include geotechnical or foundation design errors. So if during the geotechnical investigation some factors, important factors were not considered, this can lead then to inadequate settlements, and this can lead then to threat of collapse or directly to collapse. Another very annoying type of defect can be the waterproofing or weatherproofing. So failure of the weatherproofing system causing water ingress through the roof or through the foundation. This might be caused by workmanship error, or also here by wrong estimation of the water pressure in a certain region. You can see also here from the slide that you have also some consequential type of events which can be covered, such as debris removal, for instance. So if you have the collapse, you have to make sure that you get rid of the debris before you restart building your house or office building. Professional fees can be included. A consequential loss, for instance, loss of rent. Of course, if you, as we mentioned before, if you build an office building as an investment, then of course what you would like to have is still the cash flow in form of the loss of, or in form of the rent, and with such a cover you could cover the loss of rent. Third-party liability: if a third party suffers a loss as a consequence of your collapse, can be covered here as well. Also here it depends a lot on a legislation, from legislation to legislation, whether it's needed or not. Next slide, please. So on top of that, on top of all what I mentioned so far, IDI can indeed help mitigate the risk already upfront. So how are we doing that? This is done by the inclusion of a so-called technical inspection service as an additional line of defense. Let me explain a bit what the technical inspection service is. I know that my colleagues from Chedid will go much more into detail here, but just as a quick overview about technical inspection service process, the so-called TIS process. So insurers will not provide IDI without a TIS provided by an independent entity as appointed and paid for by the policyholder. So that's the first statement. So without TIS, we would not cover an IDI policy. The appointment of a technical inspection service should be made prior to construction site activity and be approved by the quoting insurer. So the idea is here to appoint this company already before you start moving one single stone on the site. The technical inspection service has to be there right from the beginning, reviewing already the design up front, and also being present during the construction, and having also some site visits during the most critical type of works, for instance, when the foundation is done. So the purpose of the technical inspection service is to avoid having this situation that at the end clients are asking for a inherent defect insurance, and we do not know what the construction quality is. The TIS is to advise the insurer and the purchaser of this insurance regarding the quality of the construction, and that it has been undertaken according to proper and relevant standard, using appropriate materials and with due care and attention to project quality, contract delivery, and so forth. So you see, that's an additional pair of eyes, an additional independent pair of eyes, advising the insurer on the quality of the material used, on the quality of the project undertaken. It's a kind of peace of mind type of additional input. TIS is required to give impartial technical advice. Therefore, it must be independent of the project owner, the construction companies, the architect, the design office, and site management. In addition, if damage occurs, the technical inspection service should not act as a loss adjuster on a building or structure it has audited. So we really have to make sure that the TIS is completely independent. What is the TIS doing? So based on the coverage offered by the IDI insurers, the activity of the TIS applies in the following areas. So this could be in the design, so reviewing calculation hypothesis, specification and drawings, the materials, specifications, test certificates, and implementation methods, the work on site, as I mentioned before, so construction methodology, execution in accordance to specification, and so forth and so forth. So also here, the work of the technical inspection service is very much in line with the cover we are giving. So if the cover is more restricted, of course, also the technical inspection service is only checking on the points we are covering. If you are not giving weatherproofing, waterproofing, then technical inspection service will also pay less attention to this problematic. So the involvement of a technical inspection service audit process can be considered really as a seal of quality, not only by the IDI insurer, but also as a tangible benefit for the developer, owner of the building, and subsequent owners, as I mentioned before. So the IDI policy goes also with subsequent owners. So this is really a seal of quality that everything was done according to specifications and material used are according to the material which were promised right from the beginning. Next slide, please. So IDI helps indeed build resilience. It helps to build resilience for the lenders, so the long-term confidence and financial backing on their investment. It helps build resilience for developers, strong selling point to future buyers or tenants. So you can imagine if you have to sell a project nowadays, where probably in some markets you have a kind of a buyer's market, then of course this is a strong selling argument. If you can say, look, this building or on this apartment, there is also an IDI cover. If there is something coming up also in the next 10 to 12 years, this will be covered by a policy. This gives a different type of peace of mind to the buyer, to the one investing money into that. So that's certainly an important fact. Let's go a bit into details here of the single benefits. So as the first one, the IDI policy is a first-party policy. As a first-party policy, there is no requirement. There is no requirement on the policyholder to establish fault, negligence, or liability of the parties to the construction contract. So, unlike professional indemnity, IDI is very often compared to the professional indemnity policies. So, unlike the professional indemnity policy, the IDI policy is a first-party policy. You don't have to prove negligence, for instance. You don't have to prove fault to trigger the policy. The policy is covered. So that means insurance can be called upon quickly if the insured property suffers physical loss or damage, or there is a threat of imminent damage due to a latent structural defect within the terms and limits of cover. So you have you can call immediately the insurance. You don't have to prove that something went wrong. So it's a quick response by the insurance. No need for time-consuming litigation. Costly, burdensome, and time-consuming litigation typically does not need to take place. Before repairs can be carried out, which enables the building to be returned to use in a more timely manner. I think that's very important. If you, as I mentioned before, if you are an investor in such a project, in such a building, whatever, you want to be quickly back on business. You don't want to lose years and years in litigation. You want to have the money as soon as possible, reinvested money, redesign the building, rectify all the defects, and being back on business. Policy assignable to future buyers or tenants. I think that's a very strong argument. So this policy is assignable to future owners and or tenants of the building who in current market conditions, as I mentioned before, in the market conditions we have now, are increasingly reluctant to assume the risks associated with building defects and may be more attracted to a building where IDI has been arranged as a opposed to one where this protection does not exist. So as I mentioned before, it's a buyer's market. So whatever you can put more on the plate is certainly helpful to sell some of the high prestigious apartments, for instance, in your area. Improved upfront construction quality by technical inspection service. So the technical audit process might identify defects prior to practical completion, allowing such defects to be rectified before the owner developer takes over responsibility for the building structure from the contractor. This independent audit during the construction phase ensures not only quality, but also compliance with plans and specifications, as well as the ultimate availability of insurance cover. So the technical inspection service is indeed a precondition. So the successful technical inspection service or the positive technical inspection service report is a precondition for getting the insurance cover. So if during the construction some remarks were made by the technical inspection service, this will then result at the end of the construction in a discussion about up to what extent the IDI cover can be given or what type of reservation the IDI cover will carry. But having said that, in general, having an independent pair of eyes looking over the shoulder of the involved stakeholders in a project, I think this as such is already a huge benefit of having this combination of technical inspection service. And then if things still go wrong, you still have an IDI cover protecting you for the consequences of an inherent defect or a threat of inherent defect, a threat of a collapse. So the IDI as such gives you then the protection even if contractors are out of trade. I think that's an important argument here as well. I hear very often that in many markets, according to the civil code, the contractor has to rectify defects and has to do that also very often in most of the civil codes within 10 years. But what happens if the contractor is not there anymore? If the contractor stopped trading, so went bankrupt, for instance, or what happens also very often, you have a joint ventures building all this nice and prestigious building in your area, very often with foreign companies, and of course the joint venture is dissolved after the project is finished, and the companies might go back to their country of origin. So it's very difficult to have then the contractor coming back and rectifying the defects on your building. So IDI provides insurance protection to repair, replace damaged property, even if contractors and or the professional team are no longer trading. All in all, it provides a balance sheet protection for the investor. So the investor doesn't have to put money aside for rectifying defects, but by buying an insurance, he or she knows exactly what he or she has to allocate in the books, and with that, the balance sheet is certainly better protected. All in all, is a peace of mind, is an additional peace of mind. And I think from that point of view, we can certainly say that IDI helps to build resilience and to give peace of mind to the project and all involved stakeholders. I think with that, I'm finished. I think I'm within the half hour allocated to me. And with that, I would give back to my colleagues and expect further advices.
Halim?
Yes.
Halim will
Good morning, everyone.
We'll take it from there. Yeah. Yes. Halim, your camera is on?
Yes, it is.
I cannot see
so
you.
Good morning, everyone. Certainly happy to be with all of you again. The travel restrictions are quite difficult on all of us. I know Elias is there, so he's compensating for a lot of us being here in Beirut. I think in 2 months, hopefully, we will be visiting UAE again and seeing all of you face to face. So thank you, Franco, for the highlights and the valuable input about the IDI product and the way it operates and the way it works. What we are really now focusing on will be really the importance of the TIS that Franco mentioned, the technical controllers. And the reason is very simple. You as insurers and of course your agents, your brokers, will need ultimately to procure IDI, to be able to understand the underwriting process and the underwriting requirements of the IDI. So I will move into the presentation just to make sure that the screen is shared. I hope you can all see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Now, reality, the technical inspection services. What Franco already mentioned something. I will insist on certain points because these points will be very relevant to all of you when trying to explain the underwriting and the background of the whole prospect. So it is a specialized engineering firm, and it's important you understand that they monitor and they inspect the project risk throughout the lifetime of the project. They have no involvement in the construction process, and this is something very important to note. It's a totally independent firm that goes and reports important aspects of the risk. The way it's appointed, it's of course the principal or the owner that appoints the TIS. You can say that the appointment must be, of course, approved by the reinsurer and who is ultimately looking at this, and the fees will be paid by the principal. The reason is simple. This service is not only for the reinsurers. It is an important role. Reports that will be reviewed and assessed by the owner, because he will be really tracking his own project in a sense. And of course, bringing back comfort to the reinsurer and the insurer carrying the risk. Some examples that are, I'd say, globally admitted by the insurers will be Socotec, Bureau Veritas, and APAV. These three, I think, are widely recognized and admitted. So once the client appoints one of those three, these three companies, you have already a good start in having adequate, proper reports, because these reports must tackle specific details and specific aspects that any other firm might not be enough up to date or knowledgeable about the things that the reinsurers need to see. And the reason we mentioned these three, of course, companies are because of the experience, whether by reinsurers or from our side, with the quality of the reports and the content. I would insist on a specific point also that there is no empowerment for the technical controller to interfere in the project, the construction works, which means he is only empowered to conduct checks and report them back. One of the main reasons you need to know about will be the particularity of the risk. So each and every construction project has particularities. And the insured interest varies. In this aspect, the TIS will be reporting the specific exposure, the details. He will make sure to protect the insured investment. And a very important point would be it will allow or avoid the cost cutting during the construction process and favor the construction quality. So you would want mainly to avoid falling into a gap of saving costs and having poor quality of construction, but rather encourage a good quality in construction. And this, the TIS will help really ensuring. And it will also, at the end, bring certain comfort to the risk carrier because they have a long-term commitment on the policy spending to 10 years and sometimes to 12, as our colleagues at Swiss Re mentioned. Now, an important highlight on the scope and in details, the TIS is responsible to go through design. So he will check really the design foundation, the design of the building versus the soil conditions. And of course, he will comment on the soil conditions and advise whether the appropriate design was used or not. He can review special features and other standard elements. He's able also, and his primary task or scope will be to report back to the owner as an advisor and an advisor to the insurer and reinsurer about the construction progress throughout the project cycle and any usage or use of, I would say, innovative or prototype material that might take place in certain projects. The work inspections happen from the beginning of the project till its end. The reports that they issue will be discussed in another slide, but these reports will be very important and it's considered as very credible and reliable information about the project because they help really in raising concerns, problems, and or sometimes even raise alarms to risk carriers about certain aspects of the project that they should mind before really going and enable or trigger the IDI. Because as you remember, the IDI is triggered after completion of the project. So this scope of the TIS of raising all these points throughout the project life cycle will be crucial, important, and I think you cannot really launch IDI or trigger it without a proper favorable review at the end or satisfactory review. What about these reports? You should be aware there are 7 types of reports that the technical controller can issue. It's not necessary, of course, that he issues this 7. Of course, these reports will vary depending on the risk. But the most important reports can be, of course, first the initial report, which is called RD0. So you have RD0, RD1, RD2 until 7, really, until 6, sorry, including RD0. The RD0 is the most important one. This is like the risk definition report, and this one will go through the entire, if you want, highlight of the risk, the scope, the structure, the cost, the design concept, and will give like a full summary review to the insurer, reinsurer about the risk. This one is issued in the beginning. Now, other reports throughout the cycle of the project will be issued depending on the risk. Now, like report number 1 is a special report about ground conditions and foundations. So if you have special foundations or special substructures, this report will be a must to be generated by the technical controller and provided to the owner and, of course, to the reinsurer. Report 2, for instance, discusses new material or non-traditional methods or processes. In case you have a project where certain special materials are used, these specific things will be raised in a special report that is separate from the risk definition or initial report. You have also an important report, and important because in our region we do face this, the waterproofness report. And this is a must in case you're having certain extensions in the cover, like Franco previously mentioned, water ingress that might endanger the structural stability. This report is important because the technical controller will tackle the material used for the insulation, for every other aspect, and satisfy reinsurers with the content. And if they are, then of course you can follow and provide such an extension, of course with certain underwriting considerations. But without this report, waterproofing cannot really be provided. You have the report number 4 relating to the new works on existing works. And this is whenever you have special risks that already have a certain existing works or existing property where you're probably say renovating or other stuff, these new values you're adding or new project that you're undertaking will require also a special report to be issued by the technical controller. And report 5 are the simple progress of work that shows what's happening on layering steps throughout the project period. And the most important one after the initial one will be the RD6, which is the completed work and the final report that the technical controller issues. This one and the first one are, I can say, the most important ones that you need really until you reach the end of the project and be able to trigger the IDI. After highlighting the technical controller, really the task, I would probably take you through the underwriting requirements and then pass on the word to my colleague Elias about the process. Now, the difference between the requirement is really and the process is first to tell you how you are really eligible to enter to open the door to underwriters and start so they can start looking at your risk. So one of the most important criteria you must have will be the geotechnical report along with the recommendations. This specific soil study is very much important and a requirement, so they can really look at your project. The other aspect would be having the RD0, as we discussed, and an appointment of the TIS, which means you should have the technical controller from the beginning of the project looking at this aspect, and you have to consider the subject insured. Some risks might contain a considerable amount of prototype material or unproven methods of construction and so on. You should be aware when you have exceedingly certain prototype aspects, these things might not really see the light in terms of IDI. Therefore, usually you would look to limit or to restrict the usage of a prototype or innovative construction methods. And the fourth and very important point will be the structural integrity of your risk, which means that sometimes we did face some prospects where late into purchasing IDI, and here the technical controller, although appointed, must insist on the structural integrity, which is a major consideration to the underwriter to really consider the IDI on any given risk. Elias will now take you a bit through the process of underwriting, which means the information that you require when you submit an IDI and what happens after you do that, including the milestones until you really issue the cover. Elias, the ground is yours.
Yeah, can we move to the next slide? So we will go through the underwriting process till the binding. Initially, as we know, like the same info that we need for the CER are the same one needed for the IDI. However, it's more crucial to have the full information available. So with the technical description of the risk, which is the scope of work, drawings are very important, especially the layout, the section, the facade. As mentioned by Halim, the soil report, and the finding of this report, including the recommendation and conclusion, will be reviewed to enable the insurer to assess the risk. The construction cost, including the design fees. Here we should mention that a BOQ may not be only BOQ may only show some quantification of the risk, the quantities only. However, what we really need is a breakdown of values and a split of values between the structures and, of course, the period of insurance. Based on the above information, underwriters can review and assess the risk. The period of review and analyzing the risk will be during will be done before the start of the project and in conjunction with the CER. Once the information are reviewed and analyzed, an indicative quotation can be issued. However, it's also important to note that the technical controller should be assigned during this period to enable reinsurer really be confident in the prospect. And the technical controller can then issue the RD0, what Halim was referred to as the RD0, which is the risk appraisal report, the first one. Based on it, the reinsurer can issue a firm quotation, and the normal discussions will start, negotiation, discussing conditions, extension, and a certificate of cover then. Once everything is agreed and we receive the binding, the certificate of cover can be issued, and the deposit premium, which is usually between 20 to 25% of the expected premium, should be paid to underwriters. Halim, can you move to the next one? So now the milestones will show us the life cycle, if you want, of the policy, and where the technical controller will be interfering, and his role in each and in each part or in each progress of the project. So first, the technical controller will be reviewing the design, and then working gradually on surveys during the lifetime of the construction. He may issue also, as mentioned by Halim, the intermediate reports, which can be specific to tackle some aspect of the risk, like foundation, new material, new construction methods. And after the reports are issued and the construction is completed, we of course know the PAC should be issued. However, this PAC should be, of course, reviewed and approved by the technical controller, by the TIS, and to enable him also issue a final RD6 report, which Halim said the most important one. So we noticed that the first important report is the RD0, who enable us to issue quotation. Based on it, the reinsurer will issue a quotation. And the final report, which is the RD6, based on it, the quotation will be confirmed. And based on the finding of the report, we can issue the policy, the IDI policy, and it can come in force, and remaining premium, of course, can be paid. The remain less the deposit already paid. Halim, thanks. So we've chosen some landmarks in our region and in Africa, in North Africa, where IDI cover was procured. Of course, worldwide, we have lots of examples, but we prefer to show those now. Abu Dhabi Financial Center, which we all are familiar with. The Bahrain Financial Harbor, also, it's a $1.5 billion project. The famous Kingdom Tower, 1 kilometer height. The Mosque Hassan II in Morocco, which is the second largest mosque in Africa, and the Rades Stadium in Tunisia, which is one of the most important stadiums in North Africa. So now Halim will take you to the next slide to discuss the loss and damages and give some example about some claims that happened.
Thank you, Elias. So really, after going and highlighting the underwriting process, the underwriting requirements, the technical controller job, and I go back a bit to the presentation of Susi, where you had some details about what the cover is really doing, how it's operating, to show you some examples of some claims that could happen when you have an IDI or an inherent defect, sorry, in the construction. The most, I think, relevant one here is a claim that is well known and happened in the Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris on the Terminal 2E. As you can see in the picture, it's on the top left. And this is the Terminal 2E, where you had a certain collapse of the arc-shaped, of course, the arc-shaped cylinder. And to discuss a bit this specific one, because I will also later give you an example where an IDI would not trigger. In this case, the picture below it will show you reality, what happened during this claim. And you can see that this is the arc shape. You have the plate glass or the, the facade on the top, and you have like a metal rod that links the concrete blocks to the plate glass, and the pressure, the excessive pressure, and that this metal rod exerted on the concrete blocks caused the concrete blocks to fail or to crack, and then therefore this whole plate glass facade collapsed as a result. So this is a very simple thing that, I mean, people would not really expect. And it's not really only concrete losses. You can have a metal structure that can fail, such as this one or any other. But reality, this loss was like this one. The IDI triggered, of course, and did cover this loss that caused the whole thing to split, really. So this is one of the things that might happen in any construction. Another example would be on the right. It can be settlement, ground settlement, as Franco earlier mentioned. And this can be a design, of course, foundation design issue. It can be workmanship. But reality, you can have examples where the building failed to settle well based on a poor, I would say, soil conditions, and then have a building split in half, or a crack can appear in a certain way to cut it, to split it. And such things, you'll be more than happy to have IDI cover when you face such failures or defects that you will never see coming. The importance of the product is not well perceived, I think, in general in the region. This is why really we're highlighting some things that really often happens during construction. And by this, I would probably just conclude a bit the session. We started with Franco talking about investments and infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure in our daily lives. So reality, when you have a certain product like IDI, first it responds to the increasing demand for investment protection to the owner. So the owner that is investing will require some comfort, and it encourages him to say that he's safe to proceed on a certain project, knowing that you don't have to go through litigations and court proceeds and other things to get a protection, because this is a first-party insurance trigger. Once a loss happens, you will recover your money. It also responds to the concerns of public authorities in respect of construction quality. And we go back to the importance of the quality of construction and the TIS, and why the quality is important. Once you have IDI, you can ensure that a certain minimum level of construction quality is there in your project. And at the end, you are really covering yourself against major threats that are otherwise concealed, elusive, that you might not even think about in any project you have.